long before the pyramids of Egypt reached for the sky, before the mighty cities of Sumer rose from the fertile lands between rivers, and before the very idea of writing etched memory into clay, there was a different world, a world untouched by kings and empires, unclaimed by borders and unnamed by maps. It was a time so ancient that history itself had not yet begun. The names of those who lived in those distant days have long since vanished, carried away by the gentle tides of time. No stone monuments recorded their deeds. No written chronicles preserved their voices. Theirs was a world of silence, of wind through endless grasses, of rivers flowing beneath star-drenched skies, and of ancient forests where no road had yet been laid. There were no palaces to cast long shadows at sunset, no temples to catch the morning light. The world belonged not to rulers or armies, but to the quiet rhythms of nature, the turning of seasons, the migrations of animals, the blossoming of wildflowers in meadows no eye would ever claim. Before the builders of cities, before the dreamers of gods, there was only life as it was, simple, instinctive, and eternal. And in that timelessness, the first people wandered. They looked to the skies, they touched the earth, and without knowing it, they began the long, winding story of humankind. Tonight, let us return to that forgotten beginning. The world of long ago was a place untouched by the designs of men. It was a landscape vast and ancient, shaped only by wind, water, and time. Great forests stretched endlessly across the land, their towering trees whispering to one another in the breeze. The canopies above shimmered with dappled light, while the earth beneath lay soft with moss and fallen leaves. In those shadowed places, animals moved quietly, deer, wild boar, and ancient predators whose names have been forgotten. Rivers, clear and cold, wound their way through valleys and meadows, tracing paths older than memory. Some rushed swiftly over stones, while others drifted lazily through misty lowlands. Along their banks, reeds swayed and birds sang, and at night the stars reflected in their waters like scattered shards of silver. Mountains rose in the distance, silent and eternal, their snowy peaks catching the last light of day before surrendering to night. They marked the edges of a world that seemed to have no end, a boundary between the known and the unknown, though in those days little was yet known. Between these mountains and forests lay open plains, vast and wild. Fields of tall grasses rippled in waves beneath the wind, and herds of ancient animals roamed freely, untroubled by fences or roads. In the evenings, the horizon glowed with the soft light of countless sunsets, unspoiled by the smoke of cities or the walls of settlements. This was a world older than kings, older than names, a world that had always been, and for a time would remain untouched by the ambitions of humankind. This was a time before cities, before towering walls rose from the earth, before temples reached toward the heavens, and before kings claimed dominion over land and people. There were no palaces, no marketplaces, no streets echoing with footsteps. The concept of a settled place, of a home built of stone and wood that might stand for generations, was yet unknown. The people of this age moved with the seasons, their lives woven into the endless cycles of the natural world. They left no monuments behind, no statues carved in their image, no names for us to remember. They belonged to the rivers, to the forests, to the endless plains, and the towering mountains that stretched across a world both beautiful and unforgiving. It was a time before laws and borders, before wealth and conquest, before the stories of gods and kings had taken shape. Even the idea of planting a seed in the soil and waiting for it to grow was still a distant thought, not yet imagined. And yet, in this ancient, unclaimed world, something subtle was beginning. A quiet stir in the long sleep of humanity's early dawn. In those distant ages, the people of the earth were wanderers. Small bands of families and kin moved across the land, following the ancient paths of rivers, shadowing the migrations of great beasts, and seeking the wild grains, fruits, and roots that the forests and plains could offer. Their world was vast, untamed, and always in motion. Survival was both simple and endlessly uncertain. Every sunrise brought a new question: where to find shelter, where to seek food, and how to stay safe from creatures whose power could not yet be matched. Yet within this constant uncertainty, there was also wonder. Around flickering campfires, these early people shaped tools from stone and bone, their hands learning to knap flint into blades, to carve wood into spears, and to shape needles from slender bone for sewing hides into shelter and warmth. They tamed fire, not as masters, but as careful stewards of a force both dangerous and life-giving. Fire gave light in the darkness, heat against the cold, and a place to gather when night fell over the land. And above them, always, the stars watched. 1,000 unfamiliar constellations marked their journey through the endless seasons. The people looked upward, tracing patterns in the sky, perhaps wondering, as we still do, what stories the stars might hold. Tonight, as you rest beneath your own familiar sky, let us drift gently back to a world before time was measured by kings and empires, before names were written in stone or history carved upon tablets, back to an age when the only calendar was the changing of the seasons, and the only clock was the steady arc of the sun and the patient wheel of stars above. We will walk together through endless forests, untouched by roads, across plains unmarked by boundaries, and along rivers that knew no bridges or boats of timberbird fleets, a world where the earth was vast and open, and where the soft footfalls of those early people left no lasting trace in this quiet journey. We will follow them as they carried fire from place to place, shaped tools from stone, and gathered around the glow of a flickering flame to whisper stories into the darkness. Theirs was a life of simplicity and survival, but also of wonder, a deep, abiding connection to the land and sky that sheltered them. So close your eyes, and let us step softly into that forgotten world together. The world, in those distant ages, was a colder, harsher place. Great, unbroken sheets of ice stretched across much of the northern lands, covering mountains, valleys, and forests beneath a thick, glistening mantle of frozen silence. These ancient glaciers towered higher than any building humankind would one day build, vast white walls that moved so slowly they seemed eternal. Their weight carved deep scars into the land, shaping valleys and rivers, etching the world into forms we can still see today. The air itself was crisper, thinner, and carried the scent of snow, even in seasons that modern people would call spring. Long winters gripped the earth for much of the year, and when warmth finally arrived, it did so with a fleeting gentleness, before retreating once more into frost. Great storms rolled across open plains, sweeping snow and ice over landscapes where no cities stood, no roads crossed, and no settlements dared take root. In the south, where the ice retreated, vast stretches of open grassland and dense, untamed forests awaited. Rivers, swollen from glacial melt, wound their way across ancient valleys, cold and clear, teeming with fish. Animals roamed these lands in numbers and variety long since vanished from the modern world. Great herds of woolly mammoth, shaggy steppe bison, and antlered deer with horns like branches of ancient trees. Predators to stalked the frozen world. Packs of dire wolves hunted in the dim light of dusk, while saber-toothed cats waited in silence among the trees. In the shadows of rocky outcrops, bears twice the size of any now living made their dens, emerging with the seasons to roam the icy wilderness. And among this world of towering ice and restless beasts, small bands of people moved carefully across the land. They were few, fragile in number, and vulnerable to the endless cold, but they had learned the ancient ways of survival passed down through generations. Clad in the furs of the animals they hunted, carrying with them fire and stone tools, these early humans traveled in the margins between safety and danger, warmth and ice, life and death. The world around them was immense and indifferent, ruled by forces beyond understanding. Mountains stood unmoving on the horizon, the sun rose and fell without hurry, and the stars wheeled overhead, unnoticed by all but those who dared to gaze upward in the long frozen nights. It was a world without empires, without kings, without temples or names carved in stone, a world that belonged to the wild places and to those who had learned, quietly, how to endure. And yet, even in this cold, unyielding world, something ancient and human flickered in the hearts of these people, a spark of memory, of wonder, and of questions yet to be asked. In the vast and often unforgiving landscapes of the Ice Age world, small bands of humans moved quietly with the rhythms of nature. These were communities bound by kinship and necessity, traveling lightly across forests, plains, and river valleys, ever watchful and cautious. Their lives were shaped not by permanence or grand design, but by survival, by the need to find food, shelter, and safety in a world that was both beautiful and brutal. Hunting was central to their existence. These early people followed the migrations of great herds, the mammoth, reindeer, wild horses, and bison, moving from one grazing ground to the next as the seasons shifted. They learned to read the land, tracking animal trails, reading the wind, and listening for the faintest sounds of life in the distance. Hunting was not only a matter of sustenance, but of skill, patience, and cooperation. It required careful planning, the crafting of weapons, and the silent coordination of the group. Yet, they were not only hunters. Gathering wild grains, nuts, berries, roots, and edible plants formed a vital part of their diet, especially when game was scarce or seasons turned harsh. They understood the cycles of plants, when seeds ripened, when fruits were ripe, and where the earth yielded its bounty. These plants provided nourishment and variety, weaving together a diet that balanced meat, fiber, and essential nutrients. This knowledge was passed down through generations, encoded in stories and memories shared around the fire. Their movements were tied closely to the seasons. As spring melted the snow, they followed rivers swollen with meltwater to new hunting grounds and fresh gathering sites. Summer brought abundance and the chance to collect and preserve food. Autumn was a time of preparation, of readying for the long, cold winters ahead. And when winter settled in, with its biting cold and heavy snows, they sought shelter in caves or constructed simple huts made of wood, bone, and hides. These groups were small but resilient, ranging from just a handful to perhaps a few dozen individuals. The bonds between them were strong, cooperation and shared knowledge were essential to survival. They shared food, stories, and responsibilities, each member playing a vital role in the life of the band. The old taught the young, and the young learned to respect the land and its cycles. Movement was constant but purposeful, never aimless. They knew the landscape intimately, the best hunting grounds, the safe crossings, the places to avoid. Their knowledge was woven into the fabric of their lives, guiding them through the challenges of each day. In this way of life, humans lived in harmony with nature, not apart from it. They were part of the landscape, their footsteps light, their presence fleeting, yet their existence profound. In the vast, cold world of the Ice Age, survival depended on the mastery of certain ancient skills that marked the difference between life and death. Warmth and freezing cold, hunger and nourishment. Among these, fire stood as the most vital gift, a flickering force that transformed the lives of early humans. Fire was more than just light in the darkness. It was a refuge. From the chill of long dark nights to the icy grip of winter days, the glow of a controlled flame brought warmth and comfort. It kept wild animals at bay and provided a gathering place where stories were shared, knowledge passed, and bonds were forged. Early people learned to carry fire with them, nurturing it carefully from one camp to the next, tending the embers as if they held the very breath of life. Alongside fire, the shaping of stone tools was a daily act of survival and innovation. Hands that once grasped only what nature provided began to shape their own instruments. Flakes of flint chipped away to form sharp edges. Pointed spearheads, scrapers for cleaning hides, and needles for sewing. These tools were crude by later standards, but no less effective. They allowed hunters to cut meat, prepare skins, and craft weapons that could reach prey from a distance. Animal hides, too, became an essential material, fashioned into clothing and shelters. As the cold winds swept across the plains and forests, thick furs were wrapped around bodies for warmth. Hides were stretched over wooden frames or natural rock formations, creating simple yet sturdy shelters that offered protection from the elements. These early dwellings were fragile compared to the homes that cities would build, but they were enough, a portable refuge that moved with the people as they followed the herds and the seasons. These survival strategies required deep knowledge of the land and its creatures, knowing which stones were best for tools, how to start a fire without matches, and how to prepare and use animal skins came from generations of careful observation, trial and error, and shared wisdom. Each flicker of flame, each chipped stone, and each stretched hide tells a story of human determination and resilience. These were the first steps toward mastering the environment, small acts of ingenuity that, over thousands of years, would shape the path toward settled life. Through fire's warmth, stone's edge, and fur's embrace, humanity learned to face the challenges of an often harsh world with quiet strength and endless adaptability. For these early humans, life was woven tightly with the natural world. Their days, their movements, and even their very survival followed the steady, unchanging rhythm of nature itself. The cycles of the sun, moon, and seasons set the pace for everything they did, guiding them through the delicate balance between scarcity and abundance. Each morning, the first light of dawn signaled a new beginning, a time to rise with the animals and plants that shared their world. As the sun climbed higher, the warmth coaxed animals from their hidden shelters, and the forests and plains came alive with sound and movement. The people listened and watched carefully, learning to predict when herds would move, when certain plants would ripen, and when storms might gather on the horizon. With the passing of the seasons came the need to adapt. Spring and summer were times of plenty, a season for gathering ripe fruits, nuts, and tender shoots. The land offered nourishment in generous measures, but this bounty was temporary. Autumn warned of colder days to come, a time for preparation and preservation. Food was stored, skins repaired, and shelters reinforced. When winter descended with its cold breath, life slowed to a cautious, quiet pace. Hunting parties became smaller and more deliberate, and communities huddled together for warmth and protection. It was a time to conserve energy, to wait patiently for the land's renewal. The moon's phases and the stars above were more than just lights in the sky. They were clocks and calendars, guiding planting, hunting, and gathering in a silent celestial dance. This deep connection to nature shaped not only survival, but the human spirit. The seasons brought rituals and ceremonies, ways to honor the land, the animals, and the forces that governed life itself. In these cycles, early humans found meaning and a sense of belonging, a rhythm that echoed through generations. In this timeless flow, their lives were small but significant notes in the grand symphony of the natural world. In the quiet solitude of hidden caves, early humans left their earliest marks, faint handprints pressed into stone, delicate images of animals, and mysterious symbols painted in ochre and charcoal. These silent artworks speak across millennia, whispering stories of a world long gone but not forgotten. The animals they depicted, mammoths, bison, horses, were more than just creatures of the hunt. They held meaning, perhaps spiritual or symbolic, connecting humans to the forces of nature around them. The cave walls became sacred spaces, places where art, ritual, and the rhythms of life intertwined. These images are not merely decorations, but windows into the minds and hearts of our distant ancestors. They show a world where humans began to understand their place within the larger story of the earth, a place of respect, awe, and connection. Through these paintings and handprints, the first traces of human creativity emerged, echoing the beginnings of culture, memory, and the stories that would carry forward through time. But even as this timeless rhythm continued, subtle shifts were unfolding beneath the surface of daily life. The world itself was slowly awakening from its long, frozen sleep. Ice sheets began to recede, and with the warming climate came new possibilities. People noticed changes in the landscape. Forests stretched further, rivers flowed stronger, and wild plants grew in abundance where once there was only snow and stone. The animals they followed moved differently, lingering longer in places where food was plentiful. Something new stirred in the hearts of these early humans. The constant movement, the endless wandering, started to give way to moments of stillness, moments where the land offered enough for people to pause, to gather in one place, to stay just a little longer. This was the first quiet step toward a world that would soon be very different, a world where the seeds of settled life, of villages and towns, would quietly take root. Tonight, as we explore this ancient time, we glimpse the delicate beginnings of change, a change that would shape the future of humanity in ways still unfolding in the vast wilderness that stretched across the ancient earth. The daily life of hunter-gatherers was a careful balance between survival and adaptation. Each day began with the soft light of dawn, a gentle awakening to the sounds of the forest. Birds calling, leaves rustling in the breeze, distant footsteps of animals moving through the underbrush. Small bands of people, often family groups, moved together with a quiet purpose. Their survival depended on the land and its creatures, and so they had to understand every season, every animal's habits, and the subtle signs that nature revealed. Their world was rich and alive, but it required constant attention. hunting was one of the most crucial activities. Men, and sometimes women, would set out with simple but effective weapons, sharpened spears, carefully crafted bows and arrows, and traps hidden beneath leaves. These tools were not the work of chance, but the result of patient craftsmanship. Flint, obsidian, and bone were shaped into points and blades, each designed for a specific purpose: to pierce, to cut, or to scrape. Patience was vital. Hunters tracked their prey for hours, sometimes days, reading footprints in soft earth or broken branches in the trees. The herd of deer or a lone mammoth was never simply a meal but a challenge that required skill and respect. The hunt demanded cooperation, silence, and a deep understanding of the animal's behavior. Meanwhile, others in the group gathered wild plants, nuts, berries, roots, and grains. Foraging was as important as hunting, for plants provided vital nutrients and could often be found even when animals were scarce. The knowledge of edible and medicinal plants passed from generation to generation, a silent language written in the hands of mothers and elders. The day's catch or harvest was shared carefully among the group. Nothing was wasted. Every part of an animal or plant was used for food, clothing, tools, or shelter. The sinews of animals became threads for sewing, bones turned into needles and hooks, and hides transformed into garments to guard against cold nights. Toolmaking was a daily art and necessity. Skilled hands flaked stones to create sharp edges, shaped bones into delicate points, and worked wood into handles and frames. This craftsmanship was not hurried but deliberate, a slow and mindful process carried out by those who understood the delicate balance between creation and use. These tools were vital for food preparation, cutting meat, scraping hides, digging roots, and for protection against predators. The knowledge of how to make and repair these implements was shared widely within the community, a bond that connected one generation to the next. Life was not without its dangers. Weather could change suddenly, forcing shelter and warmth to become urgent priorities. Predators prowled the night, and the loss of even one member to illness or accident could strain the fragile balance of the group. Yet, despite these challenges, daily life also held moments of quiet beauty and connection. The gentle rhythm of work and rest, the shared meals by firelight, the careful preparation of tools, all wove together to form a world both harsh and tender. In this way, hunter-gatherers lived deeply connected to their environment, relying on keen senses, patient skill, and an intimate knowledge of the natural world. Every day was a lesson in observation and adaptation. Every season a new chapter in the unfolding story of human life before cities, before kingdoms, and before writing. Through their daily routines, these early people laid the groundwork for all that was to come. Their simple tools, shared labor, and respect for nature echoing quietly through the corridors of time. For early hunter-gatherers, the world was more than just the land beneath their feet or the animals they followed. It was a vast, mysterious realm filled with unseen forces and spirits that moved through the trees, rivers, and skies. Their daily lives were woven with a deep sense of connection to nature and the cosmos, a relationship both intimate and sacred. They saw the world as alive, vibrant, and filled with power. Mountains were not simply rocks, but ancient beings watching over the land. Rivers were not just water, but flowing spirits carrying life itself. The animals they hunted were more than prey. They were messengers, guides, and sometimes even ancestors. As the sun rose and set, casting golden light and shadows across the earth, these early people watched the sky with quiet awe. The stars were their companions in the night, shimmering, symbols that helped them navigate and mark the passing of time. The moon's changing face seemed to breathe life into the world, its cycles mirroring the rhythms of birth, growth, and renewal. This cosmos was not distant but deeply present, and its forces were woven into stories and beliefs passed from one generation to the next. They imagined gods and spirits that lived in the sky, the earth and the waters, beings who controlled the seasons, the hunt and the mysteries of life and death. Rituals and ceremonies marked the cycles of nature. Before a hunt, they might offer thanks or seek permission from the spirits of the animals, hoping to maintain balance and show respect. When the seasons changed, they gathered to celebrate, to honor the forces that sustained them. Sacred places emerged: caves, springs, ancient trees, where people felt closest to the spirits. Here, they might leave offerings, carve symbols, or perform dances to invite blessings. These rituals were not just acts of faith, but vital threads in the fabric of community life. Art, too, became a language of belief. The animals painted on cave walls, the carved figurines, and the carefully arranged stones all held meaning beyond their form. They told stories of creation, of cosmic battles between light and darkness, of life's eternal cycles. Dreams and visions were considered windows into the spirit world, guides for healing and wisdom. Shamans or spiritual leaders would enter trance-like states to communicate with the unseen, to seek answers or protection. Though we may never fully understand the precise nature of these early beliefs, their echoes remain in the myths, rituals, and symbols of later cultures. They remind us that from the very beginning, humans sought not just to survive, but to find meaning, to place themselves within the grand story of the universe. In this ancient world of hunter-gatherers, spirituality was not separate from daily life. It was a quiet, steady companion, a way of seeing the sacred in the ordinary, the eternal in the fleeting, and the cosmic in the small steps of human existence beneath the vast, star-filled sky. Life for hunter-gatherer communities was deeply intertwined with the changing seasons. These small bands of people did not settle in one place year-round, but moved thoughtfully across the landscape, guided by nature's rhythms. Their migrations followed the herds they hunted, the ripening of wild fruits, and the blooming of plants that provided food and medicine. That a spring breathed new life into the world. The land began to awaken with fresh abundance. Streams swelled with melting snow, forests carpeted themselves with green, and animals emerged from winter hiding. These changes called the people to new grounds, places where fresh shoots could be gathered, and animals returned from distant migrations. Summer brought its own bounty. Fish swam in rivers, nuts ripened, and the warmth of the sun stretched long into the evening. The groups often gathered near water sources, taking advantage of plentiful food while also sharing news and stories. These moments of reunion were vital, a time to strengthen bonds between families, exchange goods, and pass knowledge to the younger generations. When autumn's colors deepened, the time came to prepare for colder months. The hunt focused on animals fattened for winter, while the gathering turned to roots and seeds that could be stored. This was a season of careful planning, where the community worked together to ensure survival through scarcity. Winter was the most challenging time, with shorter days and harsher weather. Bands often sought sheltered valleys or caves, places that could shield them from wind and snow. Fires were tended carefully, and stories were told by their flickering light, weaving threads of connection through long, dark nights. Throughout these migrations, The ties that bound the community were as important as the food they gathered. Cooperation was essential, hunting required teamwork. Sharing was a way of life, and decisions were often made through quiet consensus. These small groups depended on one another for safety, warmth, and companionship. Communal rituals marked these seasonal shifts, deepening a sense of belonging. Songs, dances, and ceremonies honored the cycles of nature and the spirits that guided them. These gatherings were not only practical but sacred moments where human connection mirrored the harmony of the world around them. Within these bonds, stories and wisdom were carried forward. Elders taught the young where to find the best berries, how to read animal tracks, and when to move to new hunting grounds. This shared knowledge was a living legacy, passed down through generations as carefully as any tool or weapon. The rhythm of seasonal migration shaped the very fabric of life, a dance between people and the land, marked by movement, survival, and shared humanity. In these quiet migrations across ancient landscapes, the seeds of community and culture were sown, setting the stage for the great changes yet to come. Around flickering fires, as shadows danced on cave walls, early humans found a new way to connect through stories. These stories were not just entertainment. They were living threads weaving together knowledge, belief, and memory. Oral traditions began to take shape, forming the earliest foundation of culture. Fire itself was a source of wonder and mystery. It provided warmth, light, and protection, yet it also held a sacred quality. Tales passed from one generation to the next spoke of fire's discovery as a gift, a powerful force harnessed from nature, capable of transforming the night and changing the course of human life. Myths grew around the flames, stories told of how fire came to be, often involving animals, spirits, or heroes who bridged the worlds of humans and the divine. Fire was seen as a symbol of life and renewal, a bridge between earth and sky, darkness and light. Animals held a special place in these early stories. They were not merely creatures to hunt, but were believed to carry spirits and wisdom. Many myths imagined animals as teachers or ancestors, guiding humans in their survival and understanding of the natural world. Animal spirits became central figures in rituals and beliefs. Masks and carvings represented these beings, and dances often reenacted their movements. Through these acts, people sought to honor the animals and maintain harmony with the forces that sustained life. Oral traditions also preserved practical knowledge: where to find water, which plants were safe to eat, when to move with the seasons. These stories were carefully crafted and memorized, ensuring that essential wisdom survived long winters and migrations in this world. Language blossomed not only as a tool for communication, but as a sacred vessel carrying the collective memory and dreams of the community. The songs, chants, and stories told by firelight helped create a shared identity, one rooted in respect for nature, survival, and the unseen world around them. Through oral tradition, myths, and reverence for animal spirits, these early people shaped a rich spiritual and cultural landscape. It was a beginning, the dawn of human storytelling, a gentle light leading the way from the shadows of prehistory toward the age of civilization. Hidden deep within the earth and nestled in remote valleys, some of the earliest expressions of human creativity have been preserved for tens of thousands of years. These ancient sites, like Blombo's Cave in South Africa and Chauvet Cave in southern France, offer a quiet window into the minds and spirits of our earliest ancestors. Blombo's Cave, dating back over 70,000 years, reveals some of the oldest known evidence of symbolic thought. Here, Archaeologists discovered carefully engraved pieces of ochre, shaped beads made from shells, and finely crafted tools. These items suggest that early humans were not only focused on survival, but were beginning to express ideas and identity through art and adornment. Far to the north, Chauvet Cave holds some of the most breathtaking prehistoric paintings ever found. Painted roughly 30,000 years ago, the walls come alive with images of animals, powerful lions, elegant horses, and mysterious bison rendered with delicate detail and fluid motion. These paintings were not mere decoration but held meaning, possibly serving as rituals to ensure successful hunts or to honor the spirits of the animals themselves. The cave's dark chambers, illuminated by flickering torchlight, would have been places of quiet reflection and ceremony. The artists painted with natural pigments, charcoal, ochre, and clay, carefully blending colors to create scenes that transcend time. The images evoke a connection between humans and the natural world, a shared life force flowing between them. These sites also reveal early human curiosity about the world beyond daily survival. They show a desire to understand, to communicate, and to connect with forces larger than themselves. The art found here forms a bridge, a gentle whisper across millennia, inviting us to glimpse the dawn of culture and imagination. Blombos and Chauvet remind us that long before cities and writing, humans sought meaning and beauty, telling their stories in the language of images. As you drift into sleep, imagine these ancient artists painting in the shadows, their work a timeless echo of our shared human journey. For thousands of years, much of the earth had been locked in a deep, relentless cold. Vast sheets of ice stretched across the northern lands, covering mountains, valleys, and plains with thick glaciers that seemed to hold the world in a frozen embrace. This was the Ice Age, a time when great rivers of ice moved slowly, shaping the land beneath, and the climate tested the limits of survival. But slowly, imperceptibly at first, the grip of ice began to loosen. The world started to warm. Temperatures rose, and the great glaciers began their slow retreat, melting and shrinking back towards the poles. This was not a sudden thaw, but a gradual, steady transformation that would unfold over centuries, that, as the ice receded, it revealed new landscapes, long hidden beneath the frozen sheets. Rugged mountainsides appeared, their jagged peaks softened by snow-melt streams. Fertile valleys, rich with soil carried by the melting ice, began to emerge. Rivers once trapped beneath glaciers found their way to the sea, carving new channels and watering wide plains. This warming climate brought gentle breezes and the soft green breath of spring to lands once locked in winter's hold. The earth awoke from its icy slumber. Mosses and grasses began to reclaim the barren ground, followed by shrubs and small trees. Slowly, forests crept forward, painting the land with fresh colors and new life. For the animals, this change was a turning point. Creatures that had survived in pockets found new habitats opening up. Herds of reindeer, mammoths, and wild horses roamed the expanding grasslands. Birds returned from their southern refuges, filling the skies with song. For humans, the melting ice meant opportunity and challenge. The harsh, frozen world that had dictated movement and survival loosened its grip. Bands of hunter-gatherers could linger longer in fertile areas where food was more abundant. New plants and animals appeared, inviting experimentation and new ways of living. Yet, the retreat of the glaciers also brought uncertainty. Rivers could flood as ice dams broke. Landscapes shifted beneath changing climates. The rhythms of nature, once harsh and predictable, became more varied, requiring careful observation and adaptation. This slow transformation set the stage for one of the greatest shifts in human history, a journey from constant movement to the beginnings of settlement. The ice's retreat was the gentle unfolding of a new world, one where life could flourish in new ways, and where the seeds of civilization could quietly take root as you drift to sleep. Imagine the slow thaw, the melting ice, revealing a land reborn, a world awaiting the footsteps of the first farmers and builders, a landscape that holds the story of life before the cities. As the ice continued its slow retreat, the world began to change in ways both subtle and profound. The great glaciers, which had once ground down mountains and carved deep valleys, left behind landscapes reshaped by their passage. Beneath the melting ice lay fields of stone and soil, rivers redirected by ancient ice walls, and valleys deepened by the pressure of centuries. In the wake of the receding cold, the land responded. Where once there had been endless white, now green slowly returned. The earth softened under the warmth of a gentler sun. Grasses took hold first, their delicate blades waving in the breeze, covering the open plains like a silken carpet. Wildflowers followed, dotting the landscape with colors unseen for generations. New rivers formed from glacial melt, carving paths through the valleys and nourishing the land. These rivers meandered lazily across the plains, creating fertile floodplains where the soil, rich with minerals carried down from the mountains, offered perfect ground for life to take root. Lakes, both small and vast, appeared where ice had once rested, reflecting the sky in their still waters. Forests began to spread as well. Along the riversides, clusters of birch, willow, and alder trees reached toward the sun. In the warmer south, oaks and elms unfurled their broad leaves. The land transformed from a barren, icy wasteland into a patchwork of ecosystems, open grasslands, fertile valleys, quiet woodlands, and deep, clear lakes. These new environments offered abundance for the animals that had survived the Ice Age's grip. Herds of wild horses and aurochs grazed across the wide meadows. Red deer and antelope followed the edges of the forests, while smaller creatures like rabbits and waterfowl flourished near streams and ponds for the scattered human bands that moved through these lands. The changes were both inviting and uncertain. The familiar, icy world of their ancestors was vanishing, replaced by a landscape they would need to learn anew. New animals meant new hunting techniques, and new plants brought unfamiliar tastes and uses. Each valley, each meadow, each forest edge held both promise and risk. But for those who observed closely, those who noticed which plants bore nourishing seeds, which roots could be safely eaten, and where animals gathered to drink, the shifting land presented a quiet invitation. Here, life could be more than endless wandering. Here, perhaps, it could begin to take root. And so, as the earth softened and greened, the stage was set for the first great experiments in human history. The seeds of change, scattered by wind and water, began to sprout, and along with them, the idea that some places might be worth staying for a little while longer. As the Ice Age slowly released its hold on the land, human life, too, began to shift. For countless generations, small bands of people had moved endlessly across great distances, following the herds and the seasons. They lived with the pulse of nature, never settling for long, their paths dictated by the migrations of animals and the cycles of ripening plants. But now, in this newly softened world, something quiet and almost imperceptible began to change. The rivers ran fuller with glacial melt, carving new channels through the fertile valleys. Fish darted in the cold, clean waters, while along the banks, wild grains and edible greens sprouted in abundance. Clusters of fruit-bearing shrubs took root near clearings where the sun warmed the earth. These pockets of gentle richness offered something new to the human wanderers, reasons to stay. In places where game was plentiful and plants grew thick, groups of people began to linger longer than before. A camp that might have lasted only a few days or weeks in the colder, harsher past now stretched into months. The land provided more than immediate survival. It offered the beginnings of a pattern, a familiarity that called them back season after season. Shelters, once hastily built from branches and hides for a single night's rest, became sturdier, more thoughtfully placed near reliable water sources or under the shade of ancient trees. Hearths, ringed with stones, remained in place through the seasons, their charred remains telling stories of shared meals and long nights gathered around the warmth of the fire. In these places of abundance, people began to notice the subtleties of the world around them. They observed where certain plants grew strongest and where animals returned each year to graze, breed, or drink. The tracks of deer near the water's edge became familiar. The calls of migrating birds marked the turning of seasons, and the cycles of the moon gained new importance. Slowly, the act of gathering food took on new rhythms. People returned to the same berry thickets when the fruits ripened, and to favored fishing spots when the rivers swelled with fish. The land's generosity encouraged them to build simple storage pits, lined with grasses and leaves, where excess nuts or dried meat could be kept for leaner days. These longer stays allowed for the sharing of stories, the deepening of communal bonds, and the passing down of practical knowledge from one generation to the next. Elders taught the young which plants to gather, which animals to avoid, and how to shape flint into blades and points. Myths were spun around the stars that wheeled above them at night, and the land itself began to weave its way into the collective memory of each group. The longer people stayed in these abundant places, the more familiar and meaningful those places became. Certain valleys, sheltered groves, or bends in the river took on names and stories. They became more than mere stopping points. They became markers of identity, woven into the songs and tales told by Firelight. In this quiet, gradual way, the ancient pattern of ceaseless wandering began to give way to something new. The idea that some places might be worth returning to, worth remembering, and perhaps one day worth claiming as home began to take root in the minds of people whose ancestors had known only the open road of survival. It was the earliest hint of settlement, not yet villages nor farms, but a gentle pause in the endless journey. And though they could not have known it then, these simple, lingering stays marked the first steps on a path that would one day lead to cities, temples, and written words. A world was beginning to shift, one firelit night at a time. As the great ice sheets receded and the land slowly awakened from its long frozen sleep, the bounty of the earth began to change. Where once the people had relied heavily upon the great beasts of the Ice Age, the mammoths, reindeer, and woolly rhinoceroses, now the landscape offered new gifts. These changes arrived gently, almost without notice at first, in the form of small, unassuming plants, gleaming clusters of nuts, and silvery fish darting in clear, cold streams cold streams dot with trees bearing acorns, hazelnuts, and chestnuts. In autumn, people gathered these in woven baskets and hide pouches, cracking them open around fires in the evenings. Nuts became prized, not only for their rich flavor, but for their sustenance. They could be eaten fresh, ground into pastes, or dried and stored against the hunger of winter. They were a dependable harvest in a world that had long been unpredictable. Along riverbanks and shallow lakes, grains of wild barley and einkorn, wheat, waved in the wind. The people observed these slender stalks, first as cover for birds and small game, and then as a source of nourishment themselves. Seeds were gathered carefully, carried back to camp in animal hides. Slowly, methods of grinding and roasting these grains over fire were passed from one group to the next. The act of gathering plants that grew in one place rather than chasing moving herds began to alter the rhythm of life, and in the shimmering waters, fish became a plentiful and steady food source. Spearfishing in shallow streams, netting in lakes, or trapping fish in weirs crafted from stone and wood, people began to understand the cycles of spawning and migration. Fish could be eaten fresh or smoked over low fires, their bones saved for tools and needles. The dependable presence of fish near certain waters encouraged groups to remain nearby for longer stretches of time. With these new foods came not just nourishment, but a quiet reshaping of human habits. The land, no longer only a passageway, became a partner in survival. The variety of plants, nuts, and fish promised not just sustenance but a kind of stability, one that would, over time, invite humankind to pause, to gather, and to imagine a life more rooted in place than in the ceaseless chase of the hunt. As the earth softened and warmed, and the seasons grew more generous, human bands found themselves pausing in familiar places. The long, restless migrations that had once followed the great herds from icy plains to wooded valleys began to shorten. Certain lands, rich with wild grains, nuts, and fresh water, quietly invited people to stay a little longer. What began as brief encampments grew into gathering places, where the traces of many seasons left marks upon the earth. Along riverbanks and fertile clearings, small groups constructed modest shelters, simple structures made from branches, animal hides, and woven reeds rose beside streams and shaded groves. Fire pits, once hastily assembled and abandoned, became central to these camps. Stones were carefully arranged, hearths lined with ash and embers from countless meals. Around these flames, stories were told, meat was roasted, and plans were made for the coming days. The camps reflected a new rhythm of life, one tethered to the abundance of particular places. In these semi-permanent settlements, people discovered the benefits of proximity. Skills and knowledge were shared more easily. The old, the young, and the injured could remain protected while others hunted or gathered. The tasks of daily survival, collecting firewood, drying meat, grinding grain, became communal efforts, and in the process, human bonds deepened. These gathering places were more than sites of necessity. They became spaces of memory. Generations returned to the same clearings season after season. The remains of old hearths, discarded tools, and piles of shell and bone marked the ground as a witness to human presence. It was here that ancestors were remembered and children were born. Here, the land itself seemed to hold echoes of laughter, sorrow, and quiet hours spent beneath a canopy of stars. In time, some camps took on greater significance. Perhaps it was a cluster of ancient trees, a particularly fruitful grove, or the convergence of rivers that made certain places sacred. Over years, these favored sites gathered not just people, but meaning. Rituals emerged, songs were sung to mark seasons and harvests, and the seeds of belonging were sown. The idea of home, however fleeting, had begun to take root. In the quiet places between great migrations and restless nights by the fire, ancient people began to notice the world around them in new, attentive ways. Every rock, every animal's track, every plant was a message written by the land. The earth spoke in the rhythm of seasons, and those who listened closely learned to hear it. Among the scattered grasses and wind-swept clearings, one particular discovery began to whisper possibilities into the minds of these early wanderers. Clusters of tall, golden stalks swayed in the breeze. At their tips, delicate heads, heavy with small, hard kernels, shimmered in the sun. These wild grains, ancestors to what we would one day call wheat, barley, and millet, were first gathered, not with the intention of cultivation, but as a seasonal bounty, an offering of nature. Women, who spent long hours gathering roots, berries, and herbs, were often the first to note how certain stands of grain seemed to ripen at the same time. Each year, their keen eyes caught the way animals brushed against the stalks, causing seeds to fall, and how, in the months that followed, new growth would appear where those seeds had landed. One can imagine a quiet, flickering evening as the day's harvest was shared, and someone, perhaps a mother with a curious child, or an elder recalling seasons past, posed a question both simple and profound. What if, instead of leaving the seeds to fall, we took them with us? What if we carried them, scattered them, and watched to see what would grow? It was an act born, not of certainty but of gentle curiosity. The first experiments were likely unintentional, with grains dropped along trails or discarded near encampments, only to sprout later in unexpected places. Over time, these moments of chance became observations. Patterns emerged. Some soil was better than others. Seeds sown at certain times flourished, while others withered. Slowly, a relationship between people and plants was forged. It was not yet farming, not in the sense we might recognize. It was the earliest understanding that humans could, with careful hands and attentive hearts, influence the land's abundance. These wild grains became more than just a meal. They marked a shift in perception, from taking what the earth offered to wondering how one might guide it. In valleys where floods deposited rich silt, in clearings where fire had swept through the undergrowth, people began to clear small plots. Stones were removed, soil was loosened with digging sticks, and seeds were pressed gently into the earth. The rewards were modest at first: a few extra heads of grain, a patch of sprouts where none had been before. Yet even these small triumphs would have been enough to stir excitement, to kindle new stories around the fire. Elders would have spoken of seasons unlike any before, of a time when people learned to call upon the earth not merely as wanderers, but as caretakers. Legends, likely, formed around these acts. A woman dreaming of a bird dropping seeds upon fertile ground. A child following the path of an animal to a field of abundant grain. The stars themselves, it was believed, marked the proper time for planting. The night sky, familiar and ancient, served as both map and calendar. These tentative steps toward cultivation wove into the fabric of daily life. The gathering of grains remained essential. But now there was a growing awareness that the future could be shaped by the hands of the present. Small stores of seed were kept, hidden away in woven baskets or tucked into clay-lined pits. People began to note the difference between seeds taken from the tallest, heartiest plants and those from the weak. In this way, without written words or formal science, the first quiet practices of selection and stewardship began. It was not yet agriculture, but it was a promise of what might come, and so, beneath the endless canopy of sky, amid the rhythm of footsteps across ancient plains. Humankind's relationship with the land took its first gentle, uncertain steps toward mastery, not through conquest, but through patience, observation, and an enduring reverence for the mysteries of the earth. Long before the invention of writing or the rise of cities, a quiet partnership was forming between humans and the animals around them. Among the ancient landscapes of forests, grasslands, and icy valleys, people moved in small bands, following the rhythms of the seasons and the herds. In this world, survival depended not only on skill and knowledge of the land, but also on the relationships forged with other living beings. The first, and perhaps most remarkable of these relationships, was with the wolf, a creature both feared and admired. Drawn by the warmth of campfires and the scent of discarded bones, certain wolves began to linger near human encampments. Over time, a cautious familiarity grew. People noticed that some wolves were less aggressive, more curious, and willing to accept scraps tossed from the edge of the firelight. Slowly, these wolves crept closer. At first, they served as nighttime sentinels, alerting humans to dangers lurking in the darkness. Their keen senses provided early warning against predators, and their presence alone deterred rival scavengers. In return, the wolves received scraps of food and a measure of warmth. Through countless generations, an unspoken understanding deepened. Humans began to select and nurture the friendliest, most attentive wolves. These animals, in turn, adapted to the company of people. Their features gradually softened, their temperaments grew gentler, and the bond between species solidified. From these early companions came the first dogs, creatures that would walk beside humans for millennia to come. Dogs played roles far beyond mere protection. They aided in hunting, using their senses to track prey and their speed to drive animals into traps or toward waiting hunters. They served as companions during lonely watches and comforted the sick and elderly. Around the fire, tales were surely told of loyal dogs warning of danger or leading lost children home beneath the stars. As this partnership flourished, people began to consider other animals in new ways. Herd animals, like sheep and goats, long pursued for their meat, hides, and bones, became subjects of curiosity. Some ancient groups observed that not all animals scattered when approached. Certain individuals showed a tolerance for human presence, lingering near campsites or returning to familiar grazing grounds. Gradually, the idea took root that these animals might be guided, even contained. Early attempts at domestication likely began with orphaned lambs and kids taken from the wild and raised within human camps. These young creatures, imprinted on their caretakers, grew accustomed to human voices and hands. They followed the campfires at night and grazed on the outskirts during the day. The advantages of this relationship became quickly apparent. Domesticated animals provided a steady supply of meat, milk, hides, and sinew. Their dung served as fuel for fires and enriched the soil where seeds were scattered. Over time, people developed ways to guide small herds, using natural barriers like cliffs, rivers, and constructed pens of woven branches and stone. Much like with wild grains, observation shaped understanding. People noticed which animals were easiest to manage, which produced the most milk, and which mothers raised the healthiest offspring. Without written records or formal breeding practices, early humans began to influence the traits of their herds. This delicate partnership required patience and deep knowledge of animal behavior. It was not without its dangers. Even partially domesticated creatures could be unpredictable, and wild predators remained a constant threat. but the rewards far outweighed the risks. In the gathering places of early peoples, stories would have circulated about the first wolf who shared the warmth of the fire, or the goat who led a starving family to a hidden spring. These animals were more than resources. They became woven into the spiritual and social fabric of human life, symbols of loyalty, guidance, and survival. And so, alongside the early experiments with plants, the taming of animals marked another quiet turning point in humanity's long story, one shaped not by conquest, but by understanding, mutual need, and the timeless comfort of companionship beneath the stars. As the Ice Age retreated and new landscapes emerged, early humans found themselves surrounded by an abundance of wild plants and grains. For countless generations, they had gathered what nature provided: seeds, nuts, berries, and roots, moving with the seasons in pursuit of sustenance. But somewhere, quietly, a new idea began to take root. What if it was possible not only to gather seeds, but to carry them, nurture them, and encourage their growth? This question marked the earliest steps toward agriculture, a slow, patient process shaped by countless trials and errors across generations. At first, gathering seeds was a simple act of survival. People collected wild grains like einkorn, wheat, barley, and rye during the harvest season, storing them carefully to last through leaner months. But, as they observed the cycle of growth, ripening, and dispersal, some began to wonder, what if these seeds could be placed in soil close to their camps to sprout and multiply? Early attempts at planting were tentative. Seeds might have been scattered near dwellings where the soil was disturbed, or along riverbanks where water was plentiful. The results were unpredictable. Sometimes shoots emerged, tender and green, only to wither under drought, be eaten by animals, or trampled by humans and livestock. Other times, seeds failed to germinate altogether. Through this trial and error, people gradually learned to recognize the conditions. Seeds needed loose soil, adequate moisture, and protection from wind and animals. They began to clear small patches of land, removing stones and competing plants. They experimented with watering and sowing at different times of the year, watching closely as shoots unfolded. The slow rhythm of these observations was a kind of dialogue between humans and the earth, a mutual learning. The land taught when to plant and harvest. The people responded with care and persistence. At times, failures must have been discouraging, but the rewards of success were profound. A handful of grains that grew near a camp meant less time spent wandering, less uncertainty during harsh seasons. It offered a glimpse of control over nature's bounty. With time, planting shifted from accidental scattering to intentional cultivation. Tools evolved: sticks for digging, stones for grinding, harvested grains. Techniques improved, and knowledge passed from one generation to the next through word and demonstration. Yet, this was not a sudden revolution, but a gradual transformation. For many centuries, planting existed alongside foraging and hunting. Early humans remained deeply connected to the wild, moving seasonally, following game, and gathering diverse plants. The beginnings of planting also gave rise to new social behaviors. Communities may have gathered to share seeds and knowledge, teaching each other which plants thrived and how best to tend them. Small groups could experiment with different grains and methods, adapting to local environments. This slow unfolding of agriculture was deeply tied to observation and patience. Each season brought new lessons: which seeds grew best after rain, which soil held moisture longer, how animals interacted with the crops. In many ways, the land itself became a teacher, It is important to imagine the world at this time, not as the neat rows of farms we know today, but as scattered patches of wild and tended growth. Early fields would have been small, perhaps just a few square meters, nestled near water or sheltered from wind. This tentative cultivation was a quiet revolution, setting the foundation for a world that would soon change dramatically. It laid the groundwork for permanent settlements, surplus food, and the complex societies to come. As you rest and drift toward sleep, picture these early people, kneeling beside the earth, hands careful and steady, placing seeds into the soil, with hope and patience. Each small sprout was a promise, a delicate thread connecting humanity to the land, a step toward a future shaped by cultivation and care. In the quiet shadows of prehistoric life, long before the rise of cities and written records, early humans looked outward to the creatures that shared their world and to the vast, mysterious sky above. Their survival depended not only on their skills but on the stories and lessons woven from observing nature itself. These stories, passed down through countless generations, became the legends of how people learned from animals and the stars, blending observation with imagination to guide life and survival. Among the animals, dogs hold a special place as humanity's first companions. It is said in many ancient traditions that the wolf's keen senses and loyalty taught humans about cooperation and protection. Early hunters may have watched wolves track prey, learning stealth and patience. The taming of the dog was not merely a practical step, but a bond between species, a partnership forged in mutual trust. This alliance opened new paths for survival, companionship, and even spirituality. Beyond dogs, other animals offered lessons too. Sheep and goats, gentle yet adaptable, became symbols of nurturing and provision. Their patterns of grazing, breeding, and movement revealed cycles of nature that humans began to understand and respect. Observing these animals helped people anticipate seasons, find new food sources, and imagine ways to live in harmony with the natural world. But it was not only the animals on the earth that captured human curiosity. The night sky, glittering with countless stars, planets, and the glowing moon, became a vast canvas for early imagination. Without clocks or calendars, these distant lights became markers of time and change. Many ancient stories speak of the stars as guides, teachers, and even ancestors. The movement of constellations marked the passing of seasons, signaling when to hunt, gather, or plant. Some legends describe how the stars told stories of heroic animals, great floods, or the creation of the world itself. The sky was a living map connecting earth and spirit. The cycles of the moon and the sun's journey across the horizon were watched carefully. These celestial rhythms helped early people plan their activities and understand the natural order. In a time before written language, the stars became a form of memory and prophecy, their patterns inspiring rituals and ceremonies. Many of these lessons were shared around the fire, where stories wove together the practical and the mystical. The fire itself was a teacher, its warmth, light, and transformation of food symbolized life's delicate balance. Tales of animal spirits, starry ancestors, and cosmic cycles formed a rich oral tradition, blending knowledge with reverence. These legends were not just stories, but ways to make sense of the world, passing wisdom from one generation to the next. They shaped values, survival strategies, and even early beliefs about life and death. As you listen and drift into rest, imagine the first humans gazing upward on a clear night, tracing the shapes of the stars with wonder and awe. Picture the silent communication between a hunter and his dog, a bond born of mutual trust and shared journeys. In these moments, the foundations of human knowledge and myth were laid, a timeless connection between earth, sky, and spirit. In the deep past, before the rise of cities or written history, the mastery of tools marked a turning point in human survival and culture. The careful shaping of stone, bone, and wood became a silent language of innovation and skill, allowing early humans to shape their world in new and profound ways. Among these early inventions, flint knapping, spear points, and bone needles stand out as remarkable achievements, each reflecting ingenuity and adaptation. Flint knapping, the art of crafting sharp tools from stone, was one of the earliest and most essential technologies. Using hard stones or antlers as hammers, skilled hands chipped flakes from pieces of flint or chert, shaping them into cutting edges and points. These tools served many purposes, from cutting meat and plants to scraping hides and crafting other implements. The precision required was considerable. Every strike had to be deliberate to avoid breaking the stone or creating useless shards. Spear points, carefully chipped and sharpened, were often attached to wooden shafts to create weapons for hunting. This innovation extended human reach and power, allowing hunters to strike prey from a distance. The development of spear points also illustrates early humans' understanding of materials and balance. The right shape and weight meant the difference between a successful hunt and an empty meal. Over time, designs became more sophisticated, with barbed points to ensure prey would not escape easily. Alongside stone tools, the use of bone as a material also grew. Bone needles, thin and carefully fashioned, allowed early people to stitch animal hides together, creating clothing and shelter that could protect against cold and harsh weather. This small yet crucial invention gave humans the ability to tailor their environment, moving beyond mere survival toward comfort and care. The work of making needles required patience and skill, showing an early attention to detail and long-term planning. Together, these tools reflect a deeper connection to the natural world, an understanding of how to work with raw materials and transform them into objects of purpose. The process of making tools was not quick or easy. It involved learning, practice, and often passing down knowledge through generations. It was an art, a craft, and a science all at once. The mastery of these tools also transformed social life. Crafting required cooperation, teaching, and sharing, binding communities together. The hunters who wielded spear points relied on others who made and repaired tools, and those who sewed hides depended on the knowledge of bone needle makers. This network of skills and roles helped strengthen bonds and create a shared culture. In this early age, tools were more than just objects. They were extensions of the human body and mind. They embodied creativity, adaptability, and resilience. The sharp edge of a flint blade, the pointed tip of a spear, the delicate hole of a bone needle all tell stories of survival and innovation. As you imagine the slow, deliberate shaping of these tools, picture the quiet focus of early hands, striking stone flakes or piercing bone with care. See the small bands of hunters preparing for the next day's journey, equipped with weapons and clothing crafted by skillful artisans. This was a world where every tool mattered, where every invention could mean life or death. These simple yet powerful creations paved the way for later technologies, marking a milestone in human evolution. They show how early people learned not only to survive, but to shape their destiny, one carefully chipped flake at a time. Fire, That flickering, glowing force was much more than just warmth or light for early humans. It was a profound, almost magical element that transformed the very essence of life in the prehistoric world. Mastery over fire marked a key turning point in human evolution, not only as a tool for survival, but as a sacred and communal center around which early societies gathered and grew. At its most basic, fire provided warmth during cold nights and protection from predators lurking in the dark. The glow of flames chased away shadows and dangers, creating a safe space in an otherwise wild and untamed world. But fire's importance went far beyond mere practicality. For many early groups, fire became a symbol, a living presence that connected them to the cosmos, the earth, and each other. In the gentle crackling of the flames, a quiet ceremony unfolded every evening. Families and small bands would gather around the hearth, the central fire that anchored their lives. The fire was cared for with reverence, its embers nurtured and protected like a fragile treasure. Passing fire from one group to another was an act of trust and friendship, a ritual of sharing that strengthened bonds across the landscape. This communal fire became a meeting point for stories, songs, and traditions. Around the firelight, the earliest forms of culture began to emerge: oral histories, lessons for the young, and tales that explained the mysteries of the world. The flickering shadows on cave walls and rocks may have inspired the earliest myths and legends, the sacred stories that gave meaning to life and death, nature and the stars. Fire was also deeply tied to the spiritual life of early humans. Many believed it held power, a gift from the gods or spirits. It was common for rituals to include offerings or dances around the fire, asking for blessings for successful hunts, good weather, or health. Fire symbolized transformation, the change from raw to cooked, from darkness to light, from chaos to order. The act of creating fire was itself sacred. Early humans likely guarded the knowledge carefully, passing down techniques for striking stones or rubbing sticks until sparks ignited dry tinder. This knowledge was not just practical, it was a form of wisdom, a skill linking generations. The care and patience needed to kindle fire reflected a respect for nature's power and a recognition of human responsibility. Fire also shaped social life in profound ways. It extended the day, allowing activities to continue after sunset. It created a space where people could gather comfortably, forging connections and strengthening community. The shared experience of warmth and light fostered cooperation, storytelling, and teaching, creating the foundations for complex societies. Imagine sitting by a crackling fire in the deep past, the glow casting gentle light on familiar faces, the sound of soft conversation and laughter mixing with the popping of wood. The fire's warmth soothes the body while its light stirs the mind. In these moments, fire was more than survival. It was life's hearth, the heart of early human culture, as fire became an ever-present companion. It also transformed the very food people ate, making diets richer and easier to digest, and helping to ward off disease. Its smoke could drive away insects and preserve food. Over time, the ability to control fire and share it widely allowed humans to thrive in diverse environments, from chilly highlands to dense forests. Through this sacred and communal fire, early humans found more than warmth or light. They found connection to one another, to their ancestors, and to the mysteries of the universe. Fire was a living thread, weaving together survival, culture, and spirituality. In the quiet glow of ancient flames, the earliest chapters of human society were written, not on paper, but in the shared experience of warmth, safety, and story. Fire was both a tool and a symbol, illuminating the path from mere existence toward community, meaning, and hope. The discovery of cooking was one of the quiet revolutions that reshaped human life in profound ways. It was more than just changing the taste of food, it transformed what humans could eat, how they digested nutrients, and ultimately, how they lived and evolved. The mastery of fire led to the ability to cook food, and this simple act rippled through every part of early human existence. Before cooking, humans relied mainly on raw foods, tough roots, wild grains, raw meat, and foraged plants. Eating raw food required strong jaws, large teeth, and long digestion times. Many foods were difficult to chew or even toxic if not prepared properly. The ability to cook softened these foods, breaking down fibers and toxins, making nutrients more accessible and digestible. Cooking unlocked energy that was otherwise locked within tough or harmful substances. Imagine the difference fire made when meat was roasted over the flames. The heat tenderized muscles and destroyed harmful bacteria and parasites, making it safer to eat. Seeds and tubers, once bitter or indigestible, became nourishing staples. This meant humans could access a broader range of resources and improve their health and energy levels. Cooked food also meant quicker digestion. With less energy spent on chewing and digesting, early humans could allocate more energy to brain development and physical activity. Some scientists suggest that this increase in energy availability contributed to the growth of larger brains, a defining feature of Homo sapiens. The social implications of cooking were just as important. Preparing food required knowledge and skill. Managing fire, knowing cooking times, and handling ingredients safely. Sharing cooked meals around a communal fire created rituals and social bonds. Eating together reinforced cooperation, trust, and social hierarchy. Meals became more than survival. They became moments of connection and learning. Cooking also extended the variety of foods humans could rely on during seasonal changes. Tubers and grains stored after cooking could be saved for leaner months. This nascent form of food preservation helped early communities endure harsh winters or dry spells, increasing their chances of survival. Moreover, cooking introduced tools and techniques that altered human behavior. Early humans crafted pots and containers to boil or steam food. They developed cutting tools to prepare ingredients more efficiently. These inventions, born from cooking needs, spurred innovation in other areas of life. The smell and warmth of cooking food would have been comforting signals in the wild. It attracted groups together and likely played a role in the emergence of shared language and storytelling. The anticipation of a meal prepared by fire brought people closer, fostering a sense of safety and belonging. Over time, cooking traditions grew more complex. Techniques passed down through generations helped refine diets and cultural identities. What began as a survival strategy evolved into a cultural cornerstone, shaping human history and civilization. From a biological perspective, cooked food also reduced the burden of dental wear and digestive strain, impacting health and longevity. These changes contributed to the gradual shift from a nomadic lifestyle to settled communities, where food preparation became more central. In essence, cooking was not merely a culinary breakthrough, it was a catalyst for change. It redefined human diet, social structures, health, and even cognitive development. The mastery of fire and cooking laid the foundation for the complex societies that would arise thousands of years later. So, as we trace back through time, the warm glow of a cooking fire reveals more than just nourishment. It illuminates the Origins of Human Culture, Connection and Survival, a gentle reminder of how a simple flame transformed life itself. As darkness settled over the ancient world, the flickering glow of fire became a beacon of warmth, safety, and companionship. Gathered around these glowing embers, early humans found more than just physical comfort. They found a space where stories could be shared, memories preserved, and myths born. The firelight not only illuminated faces, but also sparked the imagination, giving rise to the earliest tales that shaped human culture and understanding. In the quiet of night, the crackling fire became a stage for storytelling. With no written language, yet these tales were passed down orally, weaving together the fabric of communal memory. Stories told by firelight explained the mysteries of the world, the rising and setting of the sun, the phases of the moon, the changing seasons, and the creatures that roamed the land. These narratives helped early humans make sense of their environment, their place within it, and the forces that governed life. Mythic tales often centered on animals' powerful spirits, protectors, or tricksters. Animals seen in the forest, river, or sky took on symbolic meanings, becoming central figures in these oral traditions. The bear's strength, the cunning of the fox, the soaring eagle's vision, all were traits humans revered and sought to understand through stories. These animal spirits guided hunting practices, social behavior, and the spiritual lives of the people. Fire itself became a sacred element in these narratives. The story of how fire was discovered or gifted by a divine being was a common theme, symbolizing knowledge, transformation, and survival. To hold fire was to hold life's essence, its warmth, its light, and its power to change. The sacredness of fire elevated its role beyond mere tool. It became a link between the mortal world and the mysteries beyond. The rhythm of storytelling by firelight was slow and deliberate. The gentle crackle of flames, the shifting shadows on cave walls or around the camp, created a hypnotic atmosphere that invited reflection and wonder. This quiet tempo allowed listeners to absorb not only the content of the tales, but also the emotions, lessons, and communal bonds they carried through these shared stories. Early humans developed a sense of identity and belonging. Oral traditions reinforced social values, bravery, respect for nature, cooperation, and passed down crucial knowledge for survival. Tales of heroic hunts, seasons of plenty and scarcity, and ancestral wisdom knit the community tightly together, offering both comfort and guidance. Importantly, mythic tales were not static. They evolved with each telling. Storytellers adapted narratives to fit new experiences, challenges, or discoveries, keeping the tradition alive and relevant. This fluid storytelling nurtured creativity and fostered a deep connection between past, present, and future generations. The firelight also revealed the earliest forms of symbolic expression. As shadows danced, they inspired art handprints, animal figures, and abstract patterns on nearby rocks and cave walls. These images, intertwined with stories, were early attempts to capture and communicate the unseen forces shaping their lives. In essence, the gathering around fire was the first theater of human culture, where myth and reality blended. It was a place where the cold, dark world outside was held at bay by light, warmth, and the magic of shared stories. The firelight storytelling tradition laid the groundwork for later mythologies, religions, and cultural narratives that would flourish across the globe. As you imagine yourself sitting beside that ancient fire, hear the soft voices weaving tales of stars, spirits, and survival. Feel the pulse of those stories passed down through millennia. quietly guiding humanity's journey. These mythic tales, told by firelight, connect us to our earliest ancestors, reminding us of the power of story to illuminate the human experience, no matter how long ago or far away. In the quiet stillness of prehistoric times, death marked not only an end, but also a profound passage into mystery. Early humans began to show a growing awareness of mortality, reflected in the emergence of burial practices that honored the dead and hinted at a belief in something beyond physical life. These rites laid the foundation for ancestor worship, a spiritual thread woven deeply into human culture. Burial was among the earliest rituals that distinguished humans from other animals. Instead of leaving their dead exposed, many communities carefully placed bodies in graves, often with deliberate arrangements and accompanying objects. The act of burial expressed reverence and care, acknowledging the individual's continued presence in the community in some form. Even after their physical departure, archaeological sites around the world reveal varied burial customs. Some graves contained simple pits, while others were more elaborate, accompanied by tools, weapons, ornaments, or food offerings. These grave goods suggest that early people believed the deceased needed these items in the afterlife, implying a nascent spirituality sense that life continued in another realm or state. The positioning of bodies within graves was also meaningful. Some were laid out straight and flat, others curled in fetal positions, perhaps symbolizing rebirth or a return to the earth's womb. The careful care in burial arrangements speaks to a developing concept of respect for the dead and an understanding of death as a transition, not a final end. Ancestor worship grew from these burial rites. Communities began to honor those who had passed as protective spirits or guides, bridging the living and the unseen world. Ancestors were believed to influence daily life, bringing blessings, wisdom, or warnings. Their memory was kept alive through stories, rituals, and offerings, weaving the past into the present fabric of the community. Some early burial sites show evidence of communal graves or burial grounds, indicating a shared sacred space for honoring many ancestors. These sites served as spiritual centers where the living could connect with their lineage, fostering a sense of identity, continuity, and belonging. The role of the dead extended beyond remembrance. Ancestors were seen as active participants in the community's well-being. Rituals might be performed to seek their favor for successful hunts, fertility of the land, or protection from harm. This intimate relationship between the living and the dead created a cycle of reciprocity, a bond that transcended mortality. Symbolism was integral to these practices. Red ochre, a natural pigment found in many graves, was sprinkled over body or burial sites, possibly symbolizing life, blood, or rebirth. The use of such materials hints at early symbolic thinking and the desire to connect the physical with the spiritual. In some regions, skulls or bones were carefully preserved or displayed, suggesting reverence for the physical remains of ancestors. These relics might have been focal points for rituals or storytelling, anchoring the presence of the departed. Within the community, the development of ancestor worship also marked an early form of social cohesion. By venerating common ancestors, groups strengthened their collective identity and social bonds. Shared rituals reinforced communal values and transmitted cultural knowledge, essential for survival in challenging environments. Interestingly, burial practices varied widely across cultures and time periods, reflecting diverse beliefs and adaptations to local conditions. Some peoples practiced secondary burials, where bones were reburied after an initial period of exposure or cremation, indicating complex views on the soul's journey over millennia. These early rituals evolved, influencing later religious traditions. The reverence for ancestors can be traced through many ancient civilizations and persists today in numerous cultural practices worldwide. As you imagine these early communities, picture the solemn gatherings around fresh graves, the quiet offerings placed beside loved ones, and the stories whispered to honor their spirits. These acts of remembrance connect us across time, revealing a universal human impulse to seek meaning in life and death. The emergence of burial practices and ancestor worship marks one of humanity's first steps toward spirituality, a delicate, profound thread binding the living with those who came before, shaping the course of cultural and religious history. In the ancient world, long before cities and temples rose, nature itself was a sanctuary, a vast cathedral of living wonders that shaped early human spirituality. Among the most revered places were natural landmarks, springs bubbling with clear water, towering mountains touching the sky, and deep caves hiding mysteries in their shadows. These places were not just part of the landscape, but sacred sites where the physical and spiritual worlds intertwined. Springs, the sources of fresh, life-giving water, held special significance. Water was essential for survival, cleansing, and renewal, and the steady flow of springs symbolized purity and continuity. Early peoples often gathered around these waters, sensing their power to sustain life beyond mere physical need. Springs were seen as portals, where the earth's hidden forces surfaced and where blessings could be sought. The sound of flowing water and the cool, damp air around springs inspired awe and reverence. Many early rituals likely centered on these places, offering thanks, seeking healing, or asking for fertility of the land. Some springs may have been thought to have healing properties, with the waters serving as conduits between the natural and supernatural worlds. Mountains, rising boldly against the horizon, became symbols of strength, endurance, and connection to the heavens. Their sheer height and permanence invited contemplation and respect. From mountaintops, early humans might have felt closer to the sun, moon, and stars, the celestial bodies that governed seasons and guided migrations. The challenging climb to a mountain summit was itself a spiritual journey, a test of endurance, and a passage to sacred realms. Mountains were often seen as the abodes of spirits or gods, places where the divine dwelled. Early communities may have made pilgrimages to these peaks to offer sacrifices, pray for protection, or seek visions. The rugged terrain of mountains also shaped social and cultural life, offering refuge and a sense of identity tied to the land. Oral traditions and stories often centered around these towering giants, imbuing them with mythic qualities and making them landmarks of both geography and spirit. Caves, hidden beneath the earth's surface, held a deep and mysterious allure. These shadowed chambers were places of refuge and ritual, where early humans sought shelter from the elements and the dangers of the wild. But beyond their practical uses, caves became sacred spaces, portals to the underworld or the realm of spirits. Inside caves, the interplay of darkness and flickering firelight created an atmosphere ripe for spiritual experience. The walls bore ancient paintings and carvings, revealing early humans' desire to communicate with the unseen. These images of animals, symbols, and handprints served as a bridge between the natural and supernatural. Caves were often associated with rebirth and transformation, perhaps because of their womb-like enclosure and the transition between light and dark. Rituals conducted in caves may have aimed to invoke protection, ensure successful hunts, or honor ancestors. The natural acoustics of caves amplified voices and sounds, enhancing ceremonies and storytelling, making the experience immersive and sacred. The echo of chants and drums could have symbolized the presence of spirits, deepening the connection between humans and the otherworldly. Together, springs, mountains, and caves formed a triad of sacred places that grounded early spirituality. They were not isolated points, but parts of a living landscape that held meaning and power. These landmarks shaped early humans' understanding of the world and their place within it. By recognizing the sacredness of the land, early peoples developed a respectful relationship with nature, seeing themselves as part of a larger web of life. This reverence fostered traditions that honored balance, cycles, and the interdependence of all things. Today, many indigenous cultures continue to honor these natural sites, preserving ancient traditions and beliefs that echo the spiritual practices of our distant ancestors. The springs still flow, mountains still stand tall, and caves still whisper stories of a time when the earth itself was the first temple. As you imagine the ancient world, picture these sacred places, cool, shimmering springs nestled among trees, towering mountains bathed in the soft light of dawn, dark caves glowing faintly with painted stories. These places invite a quiet respect, a reminder of the deep roots of human spirituality, and the timeless bond between people and the natural world. In the earliest chapters of human history, long before written records or grand temples, people found meaning in the world around them by seeing the sacred in nature itself. The first gods and spiritual beings were not distant figures on pedestals, but living forces expressed through animals, the sun, the moon, and the flowing rivers that nourished the land. These early beliefs formed the roots of humanity's spiritual connection to the earth and sky, shaping how our ancestors understood their place in the vast unfolding story of life. Animals held a special place in prehistoric belief systems. For hunter-gatherer societies, animals were not just food or companions. They were powerful symbols and spiritual guides. Each species carried its own meaning and attributes. The mighty mammoth, the swift deer, the cunning wolfle represented qualities that early humans revered or feared. These creatures were often seen as spirits that could be called upon for protection, success in the hunt, or guidance. Through stories passed orally around fires, animals became the earliest gods, or totems, embodiments of natural power and wisdom. The idea that an animal could be both a physical being and a spiritual force allowed people to connect deeply with the living world, seeing themselves as part of a larger, interwoven tapestry of life. The sun, as the source of light and warmth, was another central figure in early spirituality. It was more than a celestial body. It was a life-giver, a powerful presence that governed the cycles of day and night, growth and rest. Many early communities likely worshipped the sun as a god or great spirit, celebrating its rise and fall with reverence. The sun's journey across the sky became a symbol of renewal and hope, its steady return each day a promise of life's persistence. Alongside the sun, the moon captured the imagination with its changing phases and mysterious glow. Its cycles were closely observed, marking time and guiding activities such as planting, hunting, and gathering. The moon's silvery light and shifting shape inspired myths of transformation, fertility, and feminine power. It was often imagined as a deity or a spirit that influenced both nature and human destiny. Rivers, winding through valleys and plains, were also deeply sacred. They brought water, a source of life and renewal, and connected distant lands. Rivers were seen as veins of the earth, flowing with energy and spirit. To early peoples, a river was alive, sometimes benevolent, sometimes dangerous and deserving of respect. Rituals and offerings might be made to river spirits to ensure good fishing, safe passage, or protection from floods. These elements, sun, moon, and rivers, formed a rich spiritual landscape where gods were not separate from the world but embodied within it. The divine was present in the rhythm of the seasons, the migration of animals, the rise of the sun, and the flow of waters. This understanding created a worldview deeply rooted in respect for nature's power and mystery. Early myths often depicted these gods and spirits as shapeshifters, able to move between human and animal forms, or to influence the natural elements. These stories helped explain natural phenomena, passed wisdom between generations, and guided moral and social behavior. They created a sense of order and meaning in a world that was both beautiful and unpredictable. The belief in animal gods and celestial spirits also fostered community cohesion. Shared rituals, ceremonies, and storytelling built a collective identity and connection to the land. These early gods were not isolated idols but part of a living tradition that connected people to each other and to the environment. In time, these elemental deities laid the foundation for more complex pantheons and religious systems, but at their core, the earliest gods remind us of a world where humans and nature were inseparable, where spirituality was woven from the threads of earth, sky, and life itself. As you imagine this ancient belief system, picture the flickering firelight casting shadows of animals on cave walls, the warm sun rising over endless plains, the silver moon guiding the night, and rivers singing their timeless song. These were the first gods live in the world, close to the hearts of those who walked the earth long before us. In the deep past, the rhythm of life was closely intertwined with nature's cycles, the changing seasons, the availability of game, and the endless dance of birth and renewal. Early humans, dependent on the land and its creatures for survival, developed ceremonies that honored these essential forces. These rituals were not mere formalities. They were vital expressions of respect, hope, and connection that linked the community with the natural world around them. Hunting, the lifeblood of many prehistoric groups, was more than a practical necessity. It was a sacred act, imbued with ritual significance, to ensure success and balance. Before a hunt, small bands might gather to perform ceremonies asking for the favor of animal spirits, the blessing of the earth, and the guidance of ancestors. These rites often involved symbolic dances, chants, and the sharing of stories, meant to honor the hunted animal and acknowledge its sacrifice. Such ceremonies served multiple purposes. They helped prepare the hunters mentally and spiritually, fostering focus and respect rather than recklessness. They also reinforced social bonds by bringing people together in shared purpose, reminding them of their role within the larger cycle of life. The hunted animal was often seen as a gift from the spirits, and rituals acknowledged this sacred exchange, ensuring that the community did not take more than it needed. Seasonal ceremonies marked the passage of time, celebrating moments of transition such as the arrival of spring, the height of summer, the harvest, or the onset of winter. These rituals recognized the earth's cycles, when plants sprouted, when animals migrated, when the weather shifted, and prepared the community for the challenges and opportunities ahead. Through songs, offerings, and gatherings, People expressed gratitude for the abundance of the land and asked for continued fertility and balance. Fertility ceremonies, in particular, held profound importance. They celebrated not only the fertility of the earth and animals, but also human fertility, ensuring the continuation of the community. Such rituals might include dances, symbolic gestures, or the use of objects representing growth and renewal, like seeds, eggs, or flowing water. These acts were often communal and joyful, a way of honoring life's persistence even in harsh conditions. Many of these ceremonies took place at special locations, sacred clearings, riversides, or near ancient stones, places believed to hold spiritual power. The act of gathering in these spaces helped reinforce the sacredness of the rituals and deepened the connection between people and their environment. Over time, these ceremonies shaped early religious and cultural traditions, embedding the natural world into the spiritual fabric of human life. The cycles of hunts, seasons, and fertility became stories passed down through generations, shared around fires, and woven into the collective memory. In this way, the ceremonies were not only about survival but about meaning, helping early humans understand their place in a vast and mysterious world. They celebrated life's fragility and strength, its ongoing dance between humans, animals, and the earth. As you imagine these ancient gatherings, picture flickering fires, rhythmic drums, and voices rising in song beneath wide skies. Feel the quiet reverence for the hunted deer, the hopeful anticipation of the coming rains, and the joyful celebration of new life. These ceremonies were the heartbeats of early communities, carrying wisdom, gratitude, and connection through the ages. In the vast, untamed landscapes of the late prehistoric world, human groups lived largely as small, mobile bands. These bands followed the rhythm of nature, moving with the herds, tracking the seasons, and making do with what the land provided. Yet, even in this era of mobility and survival, people sought connection beyond their immediate groups. Scattered across plains, valleys, and riverbanks were special places where different bands would come together, temporary gathering sites that became hubs of trade, ritual, and storytelling. These meeting places were much more than accidental stops along migration routes. They were vital social centers where the exchange of goods, ideas, and traditions took place. Here, humans forged bonds with neighboring groups, sharing not only practical resources but also the cultural threads that would later weave the tapestry of settled life. Trade was one of the primary reasons for these gatherings. In a world where resources varied widely by region, the ability to obtain materials from far-off places could mean the difference between hardship and survival. Obsidian from distant volcanic areas, rare stones for tool-making, pigments for art, or exotic animal furs, all found new homes through the networks formed at these sites. This exchange extended beyond the material. It was a silent dialogue of trust and mutual dependence, linking groups in a web of cooperation. But trade was only one layer of the complex social life that unfolded in these temporary camps. Rituals played a profound role, grounding the community in shared beliefs and experiences. People gathered to honor ancestors, mark the changing seasons, or perform ceremonies asking for success in hunting or fertility. These rites were essential, not just spiritually, but socially, reinforcing group identity and strengthening alliances between different bands. Storytelling, too, found a natural home at these gatherings. Around communal fires, voices would rise in the telling of tales, stories of creation, heroism, the spirits of the land, and the deeds of ancestors. These narratives were more than entertainment. They were the living memory of peoples without written language. Through stories, knowledge was passed from elders to youth. Wisdom was preserved, and the moral codes that governed society were taught. The act of storytelling also helped create a shared culture, weaving together the diverse experiences of many bands into a common framework. As people traveled back to their home territories, they carried these stories with them, spreading cultural motifs and values across vast distances. In this way, these meeting sites were not only centers of immediate exchange, but also nodes of cultural diffusion. Importantly, these gatherings were temporary by necessity. The hunter-gatherer lifestyle depended on movement, following the cycles of food availability and seasons. Yet, the desire to connect, to share, and to belong pulled groups back to these favored places again and again. Over time, repeated use of certain sites imbued them with special significance, becoming landmarks on the human map. Places remembered and revisited by many generations. Archaeologists have uncovered evidence of such gathering sites through the discovery of diverse tool types, remains of feasts, and ritual objects, all concentrated in single locations. These places often show signs of intense but short-lived occupation, marked by hearths, stone circles, and sometimes early forms of monumental construction. Through these gatherings, early humans built the foundations of social complexity. The cooperation, communication, and cultural exchange that flourished at these sites laid the groundwork for more permanent settlements. As ideas spread and bonds strengthened, the seeds of village life, and eventually cities, were quietly sown. The significance of these meeting places cannot be overstated. They represent the earliest expressions of what it means to be human, our need not just to survive, but to connect, share, and create meaning together. They are the crossroads where individual lives converged to form communities, where isolated bands began the long journey toward civilization. As you imagine these ancient gatherings, picture a sunlit clearing by a riverbank, tents made of animal hides, arranged in a loose circle. People from distant bands approach, carrying goods wrapped in leather bundles. Children play nearby, elders exchange greetings, and the smell of roasting meat fills the air. Around fires, voices mingle, some speaking in different tongues, others sharing laughter and song. In this vibrant meeting place, the first threads of a shared human story begin to weave. In the quiet moments gathered around flickering firelight at those ancient meeting places, something extraordinary was taking shape, something that would become the heartbeat of human culture. Beyond the exchange of goods and ritual ceremonies, the sharing of stories, myths, and legends created a common memory for disparate groups. These shared myths did more than entertain, they became the threads that wove communities together, stitching individual lives into a broader human tapestry. Myths, in their simplest form, are stories that explain the world and our place within it. Long before written language, they served as the primary way for people to understand natural phenomena, why the sun rises and sets, where the stars come from, or how the seasons change. These tales gave meaning to the unseen forces around them, shaping early belief systems and guiding behaviors. At gathering sites, as groups met and mingled, these stories began to merge and evolve. Different bands brought their own unique legends, but through repeated telling and retelling, common themes emerged. The concept of creation, the presence of powerful spirits in animals and nature, the cycle of life and death. These ideas found resonance across groups separated by miles and language. In this way, myths were not static. They were living, breathing traditions shaped by collective experience. The power of these shared myths lay in their ability to bind people together across space and time. They offered a sense of identity, reminding individuals that they were part of a greater whole. When tribes gathered and told these stories, they were reinforcing a communal understanding, a moral compass, a guide for how to live in harmony with the land and with each other. Oral tradition was the vehicle for this cultural transmission. Elders, the keepers of knowledge, held the sacred role of storyteller. Their voices, slow and deliberate, carried the weight of generations. The cadence of their speech, punctuated by pauses and emphases, invited listeners into a shared trance-like state where the boundaries between past and present blurred. These performances were more than recitations, they were rituals themselves, evoking the sacred and imbuing the gathering with purpose. The stories often centered on characters and motifs familiar to all: the trickster who challenged norms, the hero's journey through the wild, the sacred animal as protector and teacher. These figures became archetypes, symbols reflecting human fears, hopes, and values. Through them, listeners could explore the mysteries of existence in ways that were accessible and memorable. Shared myths also played a practical role in maintaining social order. They encoded lessons about cooperation, respect for nature, and the consequences of wrongdoing. Tales of spirits punishing selfishness or rewarding generosity served as warnings and inspirations, guiding behavior within and between groups. In a world where survival depended on mutual aid, such stories were crucial for fostering trust and solidarity beyond their social functions. These myths connected people to their environment in profound ways. Many tales were rooted in the natural landmarks that surrounded the gathering sites, the rivers, mountains, caves, and forests that seemed alive with spirit. By telling stories tied to these places, communities claimed a shared heritage and sacred relationship with the land. The landscape itself became a living memory, an open-air library where myth and reality intertwined. As groups traveled from one meeting place to another, they carried their stories like precious cargo. Each retelling was an act of preservation and adaptation. New encounters, experiences, and environments shaped the narratives, allowing them to grow richer and more complex. Over time, these shared myths spread across vast regions, linking distant peoples through a web of common meaning. This process of myth-sharing was a vital step toward the development of collective identity on a larger scale. It was the beginning of culture as we understand it, a shared repository of knowledge, values, and symbols that transcended individual lifetimes. In this way, the myths told around prehistoric campfires laid the foundation for civilizations to come. Interestingly, some of these ancient stories left their marks in unexpected ways. Rock art and symbolic objects, discovered by archaeologists, suggest that myths were not only spoken, but also expressed visually. Paintings of animals, handprints, and abstract symbols found in caves might have served as mnemonic devices, helping to recall and transmit these tales across generations. These early forms of storytelling indicate a human desire to preserve and communicate the sacred narratives that defined their world. Moreover, the act of sharing myths fostered a sense of continuity. Even as bands moved and landscapes shifted, the stories remained a steady thread, linking past to present. They offered comfort and meaning in uncertain times, reminding people that they were part of an ongoing story, one that stretched back into the mists of time and forward into the future. As you imagine the voices of ancient storytellers rising beneath a starry sky, consider the immense gift they passed down. These myths carried the hopes, fears, and wisdom of countless generations. They taught early humans how to live, how to understand the world, and how to connect with each other. And in doing so, they created the first shared memories, the collective heartbeat of human culture. Tonight, as you drift toward sleep, let these ancient stories settle softly around you. Feel the invisible threads linking you to those long-ago gatherings, to the fireside voices that shaped our earliest sense of belonging. In their timeless embrace, may you find peace and a gentle connection to the vast human story. Nestled atop a gentle hill in what is now southeastern Turkey, Göbekli Tepe stands as one of the most remarkable archaeological discoveries of our time, a silent monument from a world long before written history, dated to nearly 12,000 years ago. During the twilight of the Ice Age, this site reshapes our understanding of early human societies. Unlike the small, mobile bands we often imagine, Göbekli Tepe reveals a gathering place of great significance, a proto-temple that served as a spiritual and social hub for prehistoric peoples. At its heart, Göbekli Tepe is composed of massive stone pillars arranged in circular enclosures. Some of these pillars rise over 16 feet tall and weigh several tons, each carved with intricate images of animals, lions, snakes, boars, birds, and scorpions. These carvings are not mere decoration, they speak to a complex, symbolic language, a shared mythology etched into stone. This was not simply a place for survival or daily life, it was a sacred site, a center for ritual, worship, and communal gathering. What makes Göbekli Tepe so extraordinary is its age. It predates agriculture and permanent settlements by thousands of years. This challenges the traditional view that organized religion and monumental architecture only arose after humans settled down and began farming. Instead, Göbekli Tepe suggests that spiritual and social needs may have driven early humans to come together, perhaps even encouraging the eventual shift towards settled life. The construction of such a site required immense cooperation and coordination. Thousands of people, traveling from distant regions, must have gathered to quarry stone, carve the intricate reliefs, and erect the massive pillars. The sheer effort involved implies a shared vision and purpose, a collective will that transcended everyday survival. Here, in the cold dawn of human history, we see the seeds of civilization in the making. Archaeologists interpret Göbekli Tepe as a place where rituals connected people to the natural world and the cosmos. The animal carvings may represent spirit, guides, ancestors, or mythic beings. The circular layouts echo the cycles of nature, the changing seasons, the movement of stars, and the rhythms of life and death. Gathering here was not only about community, but about aligning with forces greater than themselves. This site also speaks to the power of memory and storytelling. Each carved pillar could have served as a visual story, a symbol to remind visitors of shared myths and values. As people returned to Göbekli Tepe over generations, these stories would deepen, reinforcing a collective identity rooted in reverence for nature and the divine. Interestingly, Göbekli Tepe was deliberately buried around 8000 BCE, sealing its mysteries beneath layers of earth. Why? Perhaps its sacred role shifted as human societies evolved and new religious centers emerged. Or maybe the act of burial itself was a ritual, a symbolic closing of one chapter as another began. Whatever the reason, this intentional interment preserved the site for millennia, allowing us a rare glimpse into a vanished world beyond Göbekli Tepe. Similar sites appear across the ancient Near East and beyond: stone circles, carved caves, and megalithic monuments that suggest a widespread human impulse to create sacred spaces. These proto-temples were places where early humans forged connections, not only with each other but with the environment and the cosmos. By studying Göbekli Tepe and its contemporaries, we glimpse the origins of spiritual life and the social bonds that would eventually give rise to towns, cities, and complex civilizations. These sites remind us that before kings and empires, humans gathered to seek meaning, to honor mysteries, and to create community through shared ritual. As you imagine the shadows cast by flickering torches on those ancient stones, picture the early humans who stood beneath towering pillars, feeling the weight of the sacred and the promise of belonging. These gatherings planted the seeds of culture, faith, and society that continue to grow in the stories we tell and the places we cherish. Today, in the vast and open landscapes of the prehistoric world, long before the first bricks were laid or walls were built, the seeds of urban life were quietly taking root. The temporary gatherings of hunter-gatherer bands for trade, rituals, and storytelling were more than simple social occasions. They were the foundations upon which the first cities would one day rise. At their core, these gatherings were practical responses to the needs of a growing and changing human population. Small groups of people, often scattered over wide territories, would come together at certain times of the year in places rich with resources or spiritual significance. Here, they exchanged good stools, food, animal skins, sharing the fruits of their labor and expanding their networks of connection. Trade routes began to form, linking distant communities and encouraging a flow of ideas as well as materials. But beyond the economic exchanges, these gatherings fostered something even more vital, a shared sense of identity and belonging. When people met, they told stories, sang songs, and performed ceremonies that honored their ancestors, the natural world, and the spirits they believed watched over them. These rituals created bonds, weaving individuals into a collective memory that transcended the limits of a single family or band. The significance of such gatherings lies in their role as social glue, bringing together diverse groups who might otherwise have remained isolated. This social cohesion was essential as human populations grew and environments shifted. It allowed for cooperation on larger scales and the pooling of knowledge about food sources, seasons, and survival strategies. As these temporary meeting places grew in importance and frequency, some became more permanent. Certain sites like Göbekli Tepe transformed from occasional gathering spots into centers of repeated congregation, attracting larger numbers of people. Here, architecture and art emerged, along with a complexity of ritual that required coordination and leadership. These proto-settlements showed early signs of social organization beyond the immediate family or band. The move toward permanence was gradual but profound. Where once people had been highly mobile, following game and seasonal plants, they began to linger longer in these communal hubs. This change set the stage for the development of fixed dwellings, storage facilities, and eventually, the urban layouts we associate with the first cities. Crucially, these gatherings fostered the development of shared norms and rules and codes that guided behavior, trade, and cooperation. The need to manage relationships, resolve conflicts, and maintain harmony encouraged the emergence of leadership roles and social hierarchies. These early forms of governance were the precursors to the political systems that would govern city-states and kingdoms. Language and communication also flourished in these settings. Oral tradition, stories, myths, genealogies were passed down and expanded, helping to preserve cultural knowledge across generations. These narratives often explained the origins of the group their place in the world, and the meaning behind their rituals, helping to solidify collective identity. Another key factor was the symbolism embedded in shared myths and rituals, which bound people to a common worldview. This shared culture was critical for the stability of larger, more complex communities. It gave individuals a sense of purpose and belonging within a broader social framework. The emergence of such cultural and social complexity created the necessary conditions for the birth of cities. Cities are not just physical places, but centers of social, economic, and spiritual life. The gatherings at proto-settlement sites were early rehearsals for this multidimensional life, blending trade, governance, religion, and community. Moreover, the technologies that supported these gatherings, such as tool-making, food storage, and eventually agriculture, provided the material basis for urban life. Reliable food supplies allowed populations to grow, freeing some individuals to specialize in crafts, leadership, or religious roles. This division of labor is a hallmark of cities. Over time, as people settled more permanently, the architecture of gatherings evolved into organized streets, homes, public spaces, and temples. The ritual focus of early meeting places expanded into complex religious institutions, and trade networks grew into economic systems with markets and currency. In this way, the temporary gatherings of ancient hunter-gatherers became the blueprint for civilization. They show us how humans moved from small, nomadic groups to larger, interconnected societies with shared culture, governance, and economic exchange. As we imagine these early assemblies, we glimpse the first flickers of urban life, a human impulse to come together, to create community, and to build something lasting beyond the individual or family. These gatherings were the early heartbeats of cities, pulsing with the promise of civilization to come. Tonight, as you drift toward sleep, think of those ancient people gathering beneath open skies, sharing stories and food, forging bonds that would one day grow into cities filled with life, light, and history. Long before kings and cities rose to power, long before grand monuments carved the landscape or written words captured history, there was a world shaped by human hands and hearts, quiet, enduring, and profound. This was a time when survival depended not just on strength, but on connection to the earth beneath their feet, to the animals that roamed beside them, and to the unseen forces that stirred the wind and rain. It was a world built on myth, where stories gave meaning to the stars above and the forests below. It was a world held together by ritual, where ceremonies marked the changing seasons, the hunt, and the cycles of life and death. In this ancient tapestry, humans were more than mere survivors. They were storytellers, artists, and seekers of the sacred. Through ritual dances, carefully crafted tools, and whispered legends by firelight, they created a shared reality, one that bound them together in community and purpose. Their lives, though simple by today's standards, were rich with the rhythms of nature and the mysteries of existence. This foundational world of myth and ritual was not forgotten. It became the soil from which the great civilizations would grow. Long before kings claimed thrones, before cities sprawled with stone and mortar, humans laid the groundwork for culture itself, an enduring legacy of survival, belief, and imagination that still echoes softly through time. Even now, as we look back across the vast stretch of time, we can see the quiet legacy left by those early people, an inheritance that still shapes our lives today. It is the legacy of language, the very gift of words, which allowed humans not only to communicate but to dream, to imagine, and to connect across generations. Through language, stories traveled from one heart to another, weaving the fabric of culture and identity. These were the first bridges between past and future, binding communities with shared memories and wisdom. Fire, too, was more than warmth or light. It was a sacred flame that gathered people together, offering safety against the darkness and cold. Around the fire, bonds were forged as faces glowed gently in the flickering light. Fire was the hearth of human experience, the place where food was transformed, stories were told, and spirits were lifted. It was a symbol of life's continuity. A fire passed down through time, and those shared stories, myths of animals, stars, and the earth became the earliest guides for understanding the world. They carried lessons about survival, hope, and the mysteries beyond. Through these tales, the invisible threads of human connection were woven, uniting strangers in common purpose and belief. This enduring legacy language, fire, shared stories, continues to burn softly within us, a timeless spark reminding us of our shared origins, our resilience, and our eternal quest to find meaning in the world around us. Imagine the river of time flowing endlessly, carrying with it the soft echoes of those first humans' whispers of their lives, their hopes, and their dreams. These echoes ripple gently across the ages, touching us even now, as if their voices travel quietly in the breeze, inviting us to remember. Each step they took, each story they shared, became part of this great current, a flowing tapestry of memory and meaning. Above us, the stars they once gazed upon still burn softly in the night sky. These same points of light have witnessed the silent passage of millennia, unchanging yet ever present. They hold the secrets of ancient worlds, watching over the forests, rivers, and plains where early humans wandered and lived. The constellations, imagined by those early eyes, became guides marking seasons, journeys, and the mysteries beyond. In this way, time is not just a line, but a vast river, carrying forward the essence of our shared past. The stars are the eternal beacons, steady and bright, connecting us to those who came before. Their light bridges the gulf between ancient and modern, reminding us that while the world has changed, the night sky remains a constant companion. So, as you settle into sleep, let the river of time carry you gently along, and let the stars above soothe your mind, silent witnesses to a story that began long before cities rose and kings ruled, a story that lives on within each of us. From these earliest days when humans gathered seeds, tended fires, and shared stories beneath the stars, sprang the first gentle stirrings of civilization. What began as small bands lingering longer in fertile valleys gradually grew into more settled communities. The seeds once scattered by hand were planted in earth made soft by changing climates. Animals, once wild, became companions and helpers, guiding people toward a new way of living that was less about wandering and more about building. These slow, patient experiments in living together laid the groundwork for something greater. Gathering places grew in importance, becoming spaces not just for sharing food, but for rituals and shared meaning. From these gatherings, the first hints of temples took shape, sacred spaces, marked by stones arranged with care, a silent testament to the need for connection beyond the everyday, but with shared stories passed from one generation to the next. The desire to remember more precisely grew stronger. The simple marks and symbols carved into stone walls began to evolve into early forms of writing, a quiet revolution that allowed ideas to travel beyond voice and memory. This turning point made possible the rise of cities, where people could live in close quarters, share knowledge, and build together. So, The world of myth and ritual, fire and stone, slowly gave way to the age of kings and scribes. Yet, the heart of it all remained the same deep human longing to understand, connect, and leave a mark on the endless river of time. As you drift to sleep tonight, imagine the silent forests stretching endlessly beneath a sky full of stars. Picture ancient rivers winding quietly through untouched lands, their waters carrying whispers of the past. Remember the first people who once stood beneath this very sky, gazing upward with wonder and hope, just as we do now. In this shared stillness, time feels soft and endless, wrapping you gently as you rest. Let the calm of those ancient moments lull you deeper into peaceful sleep, carried by the quiet magic of a world long before ours. If you found peace in this journey to the distant past, consider subscribing to gently explore more stories that ease your mind and soothe your spirit. Each video is crafted to help you unwind, relax, and drift peacefully into sleep. Feel free to share this quiet moment with others who seek calm and comfort through history's timeless whispers. Your presence here means the world. Thank you for listening softly. And may your dreams be filled with wonder until we meet again in another story from the dawn of time.